5 years ago, my sister stole my fiancé and bragged she'd won. At my father's funeral, they showed up hand in hand, flashing their wedding bands. My sister smirked, "Guess you're still alone." I just smiled and said, "Oh really? Have you met my husband yet?" When he walked over, their smiles vanished instantly, because he was. I never thought I'd be writing this story, but after what happened at my father's funeral last week, I need to get it all out. My therapist says writing can be cathartic, and honestly, after 5 years of pain and 2 years of the most incredible happiness I've ever known, I think it's time to share how karma sometimes works in the most beautiful, unexpected ways. Let me start at the beginning. 5 years ago, I was 26 years old, living in Chicago, and engaged to a man named Derek Matthews. Derek was everything I thought I wanted: tall, charming, successful in his marketing career, and seemingly head over heels for me. We'd been together for 3 years, and when he proposed on the shores of Lake Michigan during a sunset that painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, I genuinely believed I was living a fairy tale. My younger sister Madison had always been the golden child. 2 years younger than me, she was the one who got straight A's without trying, who made varsity cheerleading as a sophomore, who seemed to glide through life collecting admirers like some people collect stamps. Where I was studious and reserved, Madison was vivacious and magnetic. Where I chose practical nursing school, she pursued a communications degree that led to a glamorous job at a PR firm. Don't get me wrong, I loved my career as a pediatric nurse, but Madison always made it clear that she thought I was settling for an ordinary life. The first red flag should have been how Derek's eyes lit up whenever Madison entered a room. She'd visit our apartment in Lincoln Park, ostensibly to see me, but somehow every conversation became about her latest adventure or romantic drama. Derek would hang on every word, laughing too loudly at her jokes, complimenting her outfits, asking detailed questions about her work that he'd never shown interest in regarding mine. I should have trusted my instincts, but I was blinded by love and wedding planning. We'd set a date for the following spring, April 15, 2020. I'd already bought my dress, a beautiful off-the-shoulder gown that made me feel like a princess. The venue was booked, invitations were designed, and I was drowning in Pinterest boards filled with centerpiece ideas and color schemes. Then came the night that shattered everything. It was February 14, 2019, Valentine's Day, of all the cruel ironies. Derek had told me he was working late on a big campaign pitch. Madison had mentioned she was going out with friends from work. I was at home, organizing wedding favors and watching romantic comedies, occasionally texting Derek sweet messages that went unanswered. Around 11 p.m., I decided to surprise him at his office with homemade brownies and coffee, thinking he could use a pick-me-up during his long night. The office building was mostly dark except for a few scattered windows. I took the elevator to the 7th floor, my heart racing with anticipation of Derek's surprised smile. The hallway was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights, and as I approached his office, I could see light spilling out from under the door. What I heard made my blood freeze. Madison's laughter, that distinctive, musical giggle she'd had since childhood, was coming from Derek's office. But it wasn't just laughter. There were other sounds. Intimate sounds that no engaged woman should ever hear involving her fiancé and her sister. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds, the bag of brownies growing heavy in my trembling hands. Part of me wanted to burst through the door, to scream and cry and demand explanations. But a bigger part of me, the part that had always been overshadowed by Madison's brilliance, just wanted to disappear. So I did. I left the brownies by the door and walked away, my heart breaking with every step. I didn't confront them that night. I didn't even go home. Instead, I drove aimlessly through Chicago's empty streets until dawn, trying to process the betrayal that felt like a knife twisting in my chest. The next few days were a blur of avoidance and denial. Derek acted normal, perhaps even more attentive than usual, bringing me flowers and suggesting we go out for nice dinners. Madison texted me regularly, asking about wedding plans and sharing photos from her girls' nights out. I played along, hoping desperately that what I'd heard was somehow a misunderstanding, that my mind had conjured the worst possible scenario from innocent sounds. But deep down, I knew. The truth came out 3 weeks later in the most devastating way possible. I was at our apartment, addressing wedding invitations, when Derek came home from work looking pale and nervous. He sat down across from me at our kitchen table, the one we'd picked out together at IKEA during our first year living together, and said the words that still echo in my nightmares. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. I can't marry you. I'm in love with Madison." The pen slipped from my fingers, leaving a blue ink stain on the ivory invitation in front of me, an invitation addressed to my great-aunt Ruth, who'd been so excited about the wedding that she'd already bought a new dress. "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Derek had the decency to look ashamed, but not ashamed enough to take it back. "It just happened, Sarah. We didn't plan it. But Madison and I, we have a connection. We can't fight it anymore." "How long?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would destroy me. Since Christmas, he admitted, confirming that they'd been together for nearly 3 months. 3 months of lies, of stolen moments, of me planning a wedding to a man who was cheating on me with my own sister. I should have thrown the ring at him. I should have screamed or cried or demanded he leave immediately. Instead, I found myself asking the most pathetic question imaginable: does she feel the same way? Derek nodded, and somehow that hurt worse than anything else. It wasn't just that he'd fallen out of love with me, it was that Madison, my own sister, had actively chosen to pursue him. Had chosen to betray me in the most fundamental way possible. "We're going to tell everyone together," Derek continued, as if he was doing me some kind of favor. "We wanted you to hear it from us first." I laughed then, a bitter sound that surprised us both. How considerate. That night, after Derek packed his things and moved out, I called in sick to work and spent the entire day canceling wedding vendors. The venue coordinator's sympathetic voice when I explained the situation nearly broke me. The florist actually cried with me over the phone. The photographer offered to do an engagement session for me whenever you find the right person, which seemed impossibly optimistic at the time. Madison called me the next day, her voice carefully modulated in what I recognized as her handling a crisis tone from her PR work. "Sarah, honey, I need you to know that this isn't how we wanted it to happen." "But it did happen," I said flatly. "Yes, it did. And I'm not going to apologize for falling in love." That's when I realized that Madison wasn't calling to express remorse or ask for forgiveness. She was calling to manage the narrative, to make sure I understood that she and Derek were the victims of uncontrollable passion, not two selfish people who destroyed a family. "Derek and I are meant to be together," she continued. "I think deep down, you know that. You two were never really compatible. You're too different." Even now, 5 years later, those words still sting. Too different. As if my quiet nature, my dedication to helping sick children, my preference for cozy nights and over trendy restaurant openings, somehow made me unworthy of love. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself, it was how everyone seemed to accept it. My mother, always Madison's champion, actually said she wasn't surprised because Madison and Derek seemed so natural together. Extended family members who reached out to check on me invariably included some variation of "maybe it's for the best or you'll find someone better." Only my father truly understood the depth of the betrayal. Dad was a quiet man, a high school English teacher who believed in loyalty and integrity above all else. When I told him what had happened, he went silent for a long moment before pulling me into the tightest hug of my life. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he whispered. "This isn't a reflection on you. This is about their character, not yours." Dad was the only family member who refused to attend Madison and Derek's wedding that fall. He told my mother he had prior commitments every time she tried to pressure him, and he never once asked me to be the bigger person or let bygones be bygones. Meanwhile, Madison threw herself into planning what she called the wedding of the century. She chose the same venue I'd booked, hired the same photographer I'd wanted, and even selected a dress from the same boutique where mine still hung, unworn, in my closet. She sent me photos of every detail, claiming she wanted me involved in her special day, but I knew she was really just rubbing salt in the wound. The wedding itself was everything I dreamed of and more. Madison looked stunning in a dress that cost 3 times what mine had, surrounded by flowers I'd pinned to my Pinterest board, exchanging vows with a man who'd promised to love only me. The local newspaper even ran a feature about the PR princess and her marketing maven groom, complete with professional photos that showed them gazing adoringly into each other's eyes. I spent that weekend in Milwaukee, visiting a college friend and pretending to be happy for them when people asked. For the next 2 years, I threw myself into work and tried to rebuild my life. I moved to a smaller apartment in Wicker Park, adopted a cat named Fitzgerald, after my dad's favorite author, and started seeing a therapist who helped me understand that what happened wasn't my fault. I went on dates here and there, but nothing serious developed. How could it? I was terrified that anyone I cared about would eventually leave me for someone more exciting, more beautiful, more worthy of love. Madison and Derek, meanwhile, seemed to be living a perfect life. Their social media was a constant stream of exotic vacations, glamorous parties, and professional achievements. Madison's PR firm promoted her to senior director, Derek landed a huge account that made him a minor celebrity in Chicago's marketing world, and they bought a beautiful townhouse in Lincoln Park, just a few blocks from where Derek and I used to live. Every few months, Madison would reach out with some transparent excuse to share news about their life. She'd call to ask about Dad's health and somehow work in details about their latest trip to Napa Valley. She'd text me photos of their new furniture, claiming she wanted my nursing expertise about the safety of their glass coffee table, but really just showing off their expensive lifestyle. The message was always clear: she'd won, and I'd lost. But life, as I've learned, has a funny way of writing its own endings. 2.5 years ago, in September 2022, I was working a particularly difficult shift in the pediatric ICU. We had a 7-year-old boy named Marcus who'd been in a serious car accident, and his family was struggling with both the medical and financial implications of his care. The hospital's social work department was overwhelmed, insurance issues were creating complications, and the family was caught in the middle of bureaucratic nightmares while their son fought for his life. That's when I met James Harrison. James was a healthcare attorney who specialized in patient advocacy. He'd been called in to help Marcus's family navigate the insurance maze, and I'd been assigned as the primary liaison between the medical team and the legal team. Our first meeting was in the family conference room at 2 a.m., both of us exhausted and running on coffee and determination. I expected another smooth-talking lawyer in an expensive suit, someone who'd talk over the medical staff and treat the family like a case number. Instead, James walked in wearing jeans and a Northwestern University sweatshirt, his dark hair mussed from sleep, carrying a laptop bag that had seen better days. "Sorry I'm late," he said, shaking hands with everyone in the room. Traffic was crazy, and I had to stop at my office to grab some files. "How's Marcus doing?" For the next 3 hours, James listened intently as we explained the medical situation, took detailed notes about the family's concerns, and asked thoughtful questions that showed he genuinely understood both the legal and human elements of the case. When Marcus's mother started crying while explaining their financial situation, James handed her tissues and waited patiently for her to compose herself before continuing. "Here's what we're going to do," he said finally, closing his laptop and looking directly at Marcus's parents. "I'm going to make some calls first thing in the morning to get this insurance situation sorted out. In the meantime, I want you to focus entirely on your son. Don't worry about paperwork, don't worry about bills, don't worry about anything except being here for Marcus. That's my job now." I watched him interact with the family over the following weeks, and I was struck by how different he was from every lawyer I'd ever met. James never made promises he couldn't keep, but he worked tirelessly to find solutions. He'd show up at the hospital during his lunch breaks to check on Marcus's progress. He'd call me at home to ask about changes in the boy's condition. He negotiated with insurance companies like he was personally invested in the outcome, because he was. Marcus recovered fully, thanks to the incredible work of our medical team and James's legal advocacy. At the boy's discharge party, something James had arranged and paid for himself, Marcus's father grabbed James's hand and said, "You saved our family." James just smiled and said, "Sarah and the medical team saved Marcus. I just handled the paperwork." That's when I realized I was falling for him. It started slowly, professionally. James would call to consult on other cases involving children, and our conversations would gradually shift from legal strategies to more personal topics. I learned that he'd grown up in a working-class family in Milwaukee, that he'd put himself through law school by working construction jobs, that he'd chosen healthcare law because his younger brother had died of leukemia when they couldn't afford experimental treatments. "I don't want any family to go through what mine did," he told me one evening as we grabbed coffee after a particularly difficult case. "Money shouldn't determine whether a child lives or dies." I told him about my own journey into nursing, about how my grandfather's battle with Alzheimer's had inspired me to go into healthcare, about the satisfaction I found in caring for children during the most frightening experiences of their young lives. We talked about books. James was an avid reader, just like my father, and discovered we both loved classic literature and terrible reality TV shows in equal measure. Our first official date was to a bookstore in Hyde Park, followed by dinner at a little Italian place that James had discovered during law school. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, and when he walked me to my car, the goodnight kiss felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I'd like to see you again," he said, his forehead resting against mine. "I'd like that too," I whispered back. We took things slowly, both of us cautious about relationships for our own reasons. James had been engaged once before, to his law school girlfriend, but they'd grown apart as their careers pulled them in different directions. He was wary of getting involved with someone whose work was as demanding as his own, worried that they'd make the same mistakes. I was terrified of being hurt again, of investing my heart in someone who might leave me for someone more exciting. I told James about Derek and Madison early in our relationship, expecting him to be scared away by the drama and baggage. Instead, he held my hand and said, "I'm sorry that happened to you. But I'm also grateful that Derek was stupid enough to let you go because otherwise I never would have had a chance with you." 6 months into our relationship, James met my father. Dad had been skeptical of my new boyfriend, protective after seeing how Derek had devastated me. But within an hour of meeting James, Dad was showing him his collection of first edition novels and asking his opinion on various legal thrillers. "This one's a keeper," Dad whispered to me as James helped clear the dinner dishes. "He's got integrity, Sarah. That's rare." James and I moved in together a year and a half ago, into a beautiful apartment in Logan Square with exposed brick walls and huge windows that let in gorgeous natural light. We adopted a rescue dog named Scout, who gets along perfectly with Fitzgerald. James proposed last Christmas Eve, in front of my parents' fireplace, with a ring he designed himself based on conversations we'd had about my grandmother's vintage jewelry. "Sarah Margaret Peterson," he said, down on one knee while my parents pretended not to eavesdrop from the kitchen, "you are the kindest, strongest, most beautiful person I've ever known. You make me want to be better every day. Will you marry me?" I said yes through tears of joy, and we were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at my parents' church. It wasn't the elaborate affair I'd once planned with Derek, it was better. It was intimate and meaningful, surrounded by people who truly loved and supported us. My father walked me down the aisle, and when he placed my hand in James's, he whispered, "Take care of my girl." "Always," James promised. My mother attended the wedding, though she made several pointed comments about how rushed everything seemed and how she wished Madison could have been my maid of honor like we always planned. Madison herself sent a gift, an expensive vase from our registry, along with a note saying she was so happy for us but couldn't attend due to a prior commitment in Miami. I didn't care. The day was perfect without her. For the past year, James and I have been building a life together that feels solid and real and entirely ours. We've talked about starting a family, about buying a house with a yard for Scout, about growing old together. James makes me feel cherished and secure in a way I never thought possible. When I come home exhausted from a difficult shift, he'll run me a bath and order Thai food from our favorite place. When he's stressed about a case, I'll sit with him while he talks through the legal strategy, offering perspective from the medical side. We're partners in every sense of the word, and I wake up every morning grateful that Derek's betrayal led me to this much better life. Which brings me to last week and my father's funeral. Dad had been battling lung cancer for 8 months. True to his character, he faced it with quiet dignity and strength, more concerned about how Mom and I were handling his diagnosis than his own pain and fear. James and I spent every weekend at my parents' house, helping with medical appointments and household tasks, making sure Dad was comfortable and that Mom wasn't overwhelmed. In his final weeks, Dad made me promise that I wouldn't let Madison's presence at the funeral upset me. "She's still your sister, sweetheart," he said, his voice weak but firm. "And she's your mother's daughter too. She'll need to be there to say goodbye, and you'll need to find a way to coexist for a few hours." I promised him I would be civil, that I wouldn't cause any scenes or drama at his memorial service. Dad deserved better than that. The funeral was held at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, where Dad had taught Sunday school for 15 years and where James and I had been married. The service was beautiful, full of stories about Dad's impact on his students, his devotion to his family, and his quiet acts of service in the community. James delivered one of the eulogies, talking about how Dad had welcomed him into the family and taught him about the importance of integrity and perseverance. I was holding up well until the final hymn, when the reality of never seeing Dad again hit me like a physical blow. James noticed my tears and wrapped his arm around me, letting me lean into his strength as we sang How Great Thou Art, Dad's favorite hymn. After the service, we moved to the church hall for the reception. I was greeting guests and accepting condolences, trying to be gracious and present despite my grief. James had gone to get me a cup of tea and was talking with some of Dad's former colleagues when I saw them. Madison and Derek, walking into the hall hand in hand. I hadn't seen them in person since their wedding 4 years earlier, and the sight of them together still caused a small pang in my chest. Not because I missed Derek, God knows I was grateful to be rid of him, but because their presence represented everything that had gone wrong in my family relationships. Madison looked exactly as polished as ever, wearing a black designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her blonde hair styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless despite the supposedly somber occasion. Derek wore an expensive black suit and a tie that I recognized as one I'd given him for his birthday years ago. They both looked prosperous and confident, like people who'd never doubted their place in the world. They made their way over to my mother first, offering condolences and hugs that seemed genuine enough. I watched Madison whisper something in Mom's ear that made her smile slightly, and I felt the familiar sting of being the less favored daughter. Even at my father's funeral, Madison could make Mom light up in a way I never seemed to manage. Then they turned toward me. I straightened my shoulders and prepared to be civil, just as I'd promised Dad. I was ready to accept their condolences, thank them for coming, and move on with the reception. What I wasn't prepared for was Madison's smirk as they approached. "Sarah," she said, embracing me in a hug that felt performative and cold. "I'm so sorry about Dad. He was such a special man." "Thank you for coming," I replied, keeping my voice steady. Derek stepped forward next, offering his own awkward hug. "Your dad was always good to me, Sarah. I have a lot of fond memories." I nodded, not trusting myself to respond to that particular comment without saying something I'd regret. That's when Madison looked around the room with obvious curiosity, taking in the faces of family friends and extended relatives she hadn't seen in years. Her gaze lingered on the older couples, the church ladies who'd known Dad forever, the former students who'd come to pay their respects. It's nice to see everyone again, she said, still scanning the crowd. Though I have to say, I'm surprised you came alone, Sarah. I mean, it's been 4 years since Derek and I got married. Haven't you found anyone yet? The question hit like a slap. At my father's funeral, in front of friends and family, she was really going to do this. Derek looked uncomfortable, tugging slightly at Madison's hand as if to discourage her from continuing down this path. But Madison had always been relentless when she sensed weakness. Don't get me wrong, she continued, raising her left hand to brush an imaginary strand of hair from her face, making sure I couldn't miss the massive diamond wedding set glittering on her finger. I understand that it must be hard to find someone after everything that happened. But I really thought you'd have moved on by now. She exchanged a look with Derek, and I saw something pass between them, a shared satisfaction, a moment of smugness that they probably thought was subtle. I mean, Madison continued, lowering her voice as if she was being discreet, you're 31 now, right? And still living in that little apartment in Wicker Park? Maybe you're being too picky. Not everyone can have what Derek and I have, but there must be someone out there who'd be willing to settle for. Well, for someone like you. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt the familiar burning sensation of humiliation rising in my chest. She was doing it again, making me feel small and inadequate, unworthy of love, destined to be alone while she lived in perfect happiness with a man she'd stolen from me. But this time, something was different. This time, instead of shrinking away or making excuses, I found myself smiling. Really, genuinely smiling, because Madison had just given me the most perfect opening imaginable. Actually, I said, my voice calm and clear, I'm not alone at all. I'm married now. Madison's eyebrows shot up in surprise, and Derek's mouth fell open slightly. They looked around the room again, as if trying to identify which of the middle-aged family friends might be my mysterious husband. Married? Madison repeated, her voice sharp with disbelief. Since when? Mom never mentioned anything about a wedding. Oh, we had a small ceremony, I replied, still smiling. Very intimate. Just close family and friends. You know how much Dad loved small gatherings. I could see the wheels turning in Madison's head as she tried to process this information. Her whole narrative depended on me being the sad, lonely sister who'd never recovered from Derek's abandonment. The idea that I'd not only moved on but actually gotten married was clearly throwing her off balance. Well, she said, recovering with a skill that had made her so successful in PR, congratulations, I suppose. Where is he? I'd love to meet the man who finally convinced you to settle down. There it was again, that subtle dig, the implication that any man who'd marry me must have been scraping the bottom of the barrel. Oh, he's right over there, I said, nodding toward the other side of the room. James. Honey, could you come here for a minute? I watched Madison and Derek turn to follow my gaze, their faces expectant and slightly condescending, as if they were prepared to meet some boring, unremarkable man who was lucky to have landed someone like me. James looked up from his conversation with Dad's former principal, caught my eye, and smiled that warm, genuine smile that still made my heart skip a beat. He said something polite to the people he'd been talking with and began walking toward us, moving with the confident, easy stride of a man comfortable in his own skin. As he got closer, I saw the exact moment when recognition dawned on Madison's face. Her eyes widened, her mouth dropped open, and all the color drained from her perfectly made-up cheeks. Next to her, Derek's face went through a similar transformation, confusion giving way to shocked understanding. Because James Harrison wasn't just my husband. He was also Derek's former boss, the senior partner at the law firm where Derek had worked until 6 months ago, when he'd been abruptly fired for what the company had described as performance issues but what everyone in Chicago's legal community knew was really about a massive client relations disaster that had nearly cost the firm a multi-million-dollar account. Sorry about that, James said as he reached us, sliding his arm around my waist with natural ease. Mr. Peterson wanted to tell me some stories about your dad's impact on his students. Your father sounds like he was an incredible teacher, sweetheart. He kissed my temple gently, then turned to Madison and Derek with polite interest. James Harrison, he said, extending his hand to Madison first. You must be Sarah's sister. I've heard so much about you. Madison stared at his outstretched hand like it might bite her, her face cycling through expressions of shock, confusion, and dawning horror. She managed to shake his hand weakly, but no words came out of her mouth. Derek, meanwhile, had gone completely pale and was looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Hello, Derek, James said pleasantly, offering his hand to my former fiancée as well. Nice to see you again. Mr. Harrison, Derek managed to croak, his voice barely audible. I didn't know. I didn't realize. That Sarah and I were married? James finished, his tone remaining perfectly friendly even as his words carried an undercurrent of steel. Yes, it's been wonderful. Sarah's incredible, brilliant, compassionate, absolutely devoted to her work with sick children. I consider myself the luckiest man in Chicago. He squeezed my waist gently as he spoke, and I leaned into him, finally understanding why he'd been so amused when I told him months ago that Madison and Derek would probably be at Dad's funeral. "You know Derek?" Madison finally managed to ask, her voice strangled. "Oh yes," James replied smoothly. "Derek used to work for my firm. Talented marketer, though I understand he's been exploring new opportunities lately." The euphemism hung in the air like a sword over Derek's head. Everyone in their social circle knew that Derek had been fired, that his career in Chicago was essentially over, that he'd been struggling to find new employment for months. Madison's PR firm had been covering their expenses while Derek sent out resume after resume to companies that wouldn't return his calls. "New opportunities," Madison repeated weakly, her hand tightening on Derek's arm. "I'm sure something will turn up," James said with a kind of bland optimism that clearly indicated he thought nothing would turn up anytime soon. The marketing world can be quite competitive, especially after. Well, I'm sure you understand. Derek's face had now progressed from pale to greenish, and I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Actually," James continued, turning back to me with genuine warmth, "I should probably steal my wife away for a moment. The pastor wanted to speak with her about the scholarship fund we're establishing in your father's name." He said my wife with such natural pride that my heart swelled with love for this man who'd rescued me from a conversation I'd been dreading and turned it into a moment of quiet triumph. "Of course," I said, smiling up at him. "Madison, Derek, thank you again for coming. It would have meant so much to Dad." I started to turn away, then paused as if I'd just remembered something. "Oh, and Madison? You were right about one thing, not everyone can have what you and Derek have. I'm just grateful I ended up with something so much better." And with that, James and I walked away, leaving them standing speechless in the middle of the church hall. As we made our way across the room, James leaned down to whisper in my ear. "How did that feel?" "Like justice," I whispered back. "Finally." The rest of the reception passed in a blur of conversations with family friends, shared memories of Dad, and moments of grief mixed with gratitude for all the love and support surrounding us. Madison and Derek left shortly after our encounter, slipping out without saying goodbye to anyone else. Later, as James and I were helping Mom clean up the church hall, she pulled me aside. "I saw you talking to Madison earlier," she said carefully. "How did that go?" I considered telling her about the whole conversation, about Madison's cruel comments and the look on her face when she realized who James was. But Dad had taught me that the best revenge is living well, and I was finally doing that. "It was fine, Mom," I said instead. We were both focused on honoring Dad. She nodded, looking relieved that there hadn't been any drama at the funeral. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," she said, hugging me tightly. "Your father would be proud too. You've built such a beautiful life with James." That night, as James and I finally collapsed into bed, exhausted from the emotional weight of the day, he pulled me close and asked if I was okay. "I know today was hard," he said, stroking my hair. "Losing your dad, dealing with Madison and Derek. That's a lot to handle." I thought about his question, taking inventory of my feelings. Yes, I was devastated about Dad's death. Yes, I was still processing the grief of losing the man who'd been my biggest supporter and strongest advocate. But for the first time in 5 years, I felt completely free of the shame and inadequacy that Madison had spent so long making me feel. "I'm sad about Dad," I said finally. "I'll probably be sad about that for a long time. But everything else? Everything with Madison and Derek? I think I'm finally done carrying that pain around." James kissed the top of my head. "Good. You deserve to be free of all that. Can I ask you something?" I said, tilting my head to look at him. "When did you realize who they were?" "When I told you their names months ago." He grinned, looking slightly sheepish. "The moment you said Derek Matthews. There aren't that many marketing consultants in Chicago who've been involved in the kind of legal trouble Derek has faced. Plus, when you mentioned he'd been engaged to a pediatric nurse named Sarah before running off with her sister, all the pieces clicked into place. What made you take his case in the first place?" I asked, curious despite myself. "His former clients came to us when Derek's billing practices got questionable and his work quality declined. It was a straightforward breach of contract case." James paused, his expression growing serious. "I had no idea at the time that he was the same Derek who'd hurt you so badly. When I made that connection, I have to admit, I felt a certain satisfaction in making sure he faced appropriate consequences for his professional misconduct." I kissed him then, pouring all my love and gratitude into that moment. This man who'd seen my worth when I couldn't see it myself, who'd helped me rebuild not just my romantic life but my entire sense of self-worth, who'd stood by my side through my father's illness and death and every other challenge we'd faced together. "I love you," I whispered against his lips. "I love you too," he whispered back. Always. It's been a week since the funeral, and life is slowly returning to normal. I'm back at work, caring for sick children and their families, finding purpose and meaning in the career I chose long before Derek ever entered my life. James is immersed in a new case involving a child who needs expensive surgery that his family's insurance won't cover. Scout is sprawled across our couch, and Fitzgerald is perched on his favorite windowsill, watching birds in the courtyard. Mom called yesterday to tell me that she'd heard through family friends that Derek still hasn't found a new job, and that he and Madison have quietly put their townhouse on the market. Apparently, maintaining their expensive lifestyle on Madison's salary alone has proven more challenging than they anticipated. I thought you should know, Mom said carefully, in case you run into them around town. I thanked her for the heads up, but honestly, I felt nothing but a distant sort of pity. The life they built together, constructed on the foundation of betrayal and selfishness, was crumbling under the weight of reality. Meanwhile, James and I were planning our first anniversary trip to Ireland, where we want to visit the places that inspired some of Dad's favorite authors. I used to think that karma was about dramatic moments of comeuppance, about grand gestures of revenge that would make my enemies suffer as much as they'd made me suffer. But I've learned that the best karma is simply living well, building something real and lasting with someone who values you for exactly who you are. Madison thought she'd won when she stole Derek away from me. She thought she'd proven that she was more desirable, more worthy of love, more deserving of happiness. For years, I believed her narrative. I let her convince me that I was the consolation prize, the sister who'd always come in second place. But standing in that church hall last week, watching her face crumble as she realized that not only had I moved on, but I'd moved on to something infinitely better than what she'd taken from me, I finally understood the truth. Madison didn't win anything. She got Derek, a man who was capable of betraying someone he'd promised to love, someone who was willing to destroy a family for his own selfish desires, someone whose word meant nothing when tested. She got a relationship built on lies and betrayal, a foundation so shaky that it couldn't weather even basic professional setbacks. I got James, a man of integrity who fights for families like the one he lost as a child, who sees my work as a calling rather than just a job, who loves me not in spite of my quiet nature but because of it. I got a partnership built on honesty and mutual respect, a love that grows stronger with every challenge we face together. The wedding dress I never got to wear to marry Derek is still hanging in my closet, though I've been thinking about donating it to a nonprofit that provides dresses for brides who can't afford them. The invitations I address but never send are in a box somewhere in storage. But the life I planned with Derek, the suburban house, the social climbing, the constant performance of happiness, that was never really what I wanted anyway. What I have now is better than anything I could have imagined 5 years ago when my world fell apart. I have work that matters, a husband who cherishes me, friends who value my loyalty, and the kind of quiet contentment that can't be bought or stolen or performed for social media. James and I have started talking seriously about having children, about the kind of parents we want to be, about raising kids who understand the difference between kindness and weakness, between confidence and cruelty. We want to teach them that real strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. That love isn't a competition to be won, but a gift to be shared. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Derek had never cheated, if he and Madison had never betrayed me, if I'd gone through with that April wedding 5 years ago. Would I have been happy in that life? Would I have ever realized that I deserved something better than a man who could fall out of love so easily? I don't think so. I think I would have spent years trying to be the wife Derek wanted, trying to compete with Madison's memory, trying to be more exciting and glamorous and worthy of his attention. I would have slowly lost myself in the effort to keep a man who was never really mine to begin with. Instead, their betrayal forced me to rebuild my life from the ground up, to figure out who I was when I wasn't trying to be what someone else wanted. It led me to James, to a love that doesn't require me to change or perform or constantly prove my worth. It led me to understand that my quiet strength, my dedication to caring for others, my preference for depth over surface, these aren't flaws to be hidden or apologized for. They're the very things that make me who I am. The morning after Dad's funeral, I woke up to find James already awake, watching me sleep with that soft smile he gets when he thinks I'm not looking. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrison," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," I whispered back, stretching against him like a contented cat. "How are you feeling?" I considered the question seriously. My father was gone, and that loss would be with me forever. But I was surrounded by love, James's love, my mother's love, the love of friends and colleagues who'd become like family. I was doing work that mattered, building a life that felt authentic and meaningful. "I feel grateful," I said finally. Sad about Dad, but grateful for everything else. "Even grateful for Madison and Derek?" James asked, raising an eyebrow. I laughed, surprising myself. "You know what? Maybe I am. If they hadn't done what they did, I never would have met you. I never would have learned what real love actually feels like." So you're saying I should send them a thank you card? James teased. Don't you dare, I laughed, swatting at his chest. I may be grateful for how things turned out, but I'm not that grateful. He pulled me closer, and we lay there in comfortable silence as the morning light filtered through our bedroom windows. Outside, Chicago was waking up, people heading to work, children walking to school, life continuing in all its messy, beautiful complexity. I thought about Madison and Derek, probably waking up in their expensive townhouse that they could no longer afford, facing another day of uncertainty and financial stress. I thought about the cracks that must be showing in their relationship now that the fairy tale veneer had worn off, now that they had to deal with real problems instead of stolen romance. Part of me, a very small part, felt sorry for them. They thought they were getting everything they wanted, but they'd really just gotten each other. And based on how easily Derek had betrayed me and how quickly Madison had been willing to destroy our sisterly bond, I doubted either of them was capable of the kind of loyalty and commitment that real love requires. But mostly, I felt free. Free from the anger and resentment that had weighed me down for so long. Free from the need to prove myself worthy of love. Free from the narrative that I was somehow less than Madison, somehow undeserving of happiness. I was exactly where I belonged, with exactly the right person, living exactly the life I was meant to live. Later that morning, as James and I made breakfast together in our sunny kitchen, Scout sprawled across the floor hoping for dropped bacon, I found myself thinking about something Dad had said during one of our last conversations. You know, sweetheart, he'd said, his voice weak but his eyes still sharp, I used to worry about you after what happened with Derek. I thought that betrayal might make you afraid to trust again, afraid to open your heart to someone new. It did, for a while, I'd admit it. But you didn't let it close you off permanently, he continued. You found James, you let yourself love again, and you built something beautiful. That takes real courage, Sarah. I'm so proud of the woman you've become. Those words had meant everything to me then, and they mean even more now. Dad had seen what I couldn't see at the time, that going through that heartbreak hadn't made me weaker. It had made me stronger, more discerning, more appreciative of genuine love when I finally found it.